Okay, chapter 13 is discussing communication climate. We're going to discuss what is a communication climate, how to create supportive climates, and then go from conversation and from monologue to dialogue. The learning objectives that we will cover is we will explain the nature of the communication climates, describe how communication climates can develop. We will distinguish the factors that create defensive versus supportive communication climates, and then demonstrate ways to engage in casual conversations and civil dialogues. So let's start. So how would you describe, your most important relationships? Do you think they are warm, hot, cold? What do they feel like? It's kind of, just as a physical location has weather patterns, interpersonal relationships have unique climates. It's not like you can take a thermometer and describe that with a specific temperature and be like, oh, it's 80 degrees. Or you can't look at the sky and say it's sunny, or there's clouds, or there's a storm coming in. It's not the same as when you describe the weather. But every relationship has a feeling. It has some sort of mood that kind of describes what's going on with the people that are involved in that particular relationship. So the specific term communication climate refers to the social tone of the relationship. A climate doesn't involve specific activities as much as the way that the people feel about each other as they are carrying out those activities. So it's more about the way that you are feeling as you're interacting, doing something. So how do these climates develop? So a climate is determined by the degree to which people see themselves as valued. So essentially, communicators who perceive others as liking, appreciating, and respecting them will generally react positively, whereas those who feel unimportant or abused are going to react negatively. So communication scholars use the term confirming communication to describe either direct or indirect messages that convey value. So in one form or another, these confirming messages are essentially conveying, like, you exist, you matter, you're important to me in some way. And so how do we show people that they matter or that they're important? We may do this through recognition. So recognition is the most fundamental act of confirming. It's just basically indicating awareness of the other person. Another thing that you may do is that you acknowledge someone that is basically paying attention to the ideas and feelings of others. So that's a stronger form of confirmation rather than just recognition. Another thing that we do is endorsement. This is when you agree with the speaker, and it's the strongest form of confirming. On the opposite end of this, you will do disconfirming communication, and this is going to signal a lack of regard. So in some form, you're basically saying you don't matter, you're not important, or you don't exist. And so you may do this through being argumentative and basically present and defend positions on different issues. and basically try to argue against the person. Another thing that you might do is you might complain. So this is basically a way that you show that you're, not satisfied, but you're not arguing. You're just complaining about something in some way. And so I'm sure that, you have probably done both of these things in all of your relationships, whether it was, showing recognition, like, glad to see you, I'll be right with you. Acknowledgement could be something like, I can see your point, I understand how you can feel that way. Or, endorsement could be, you're right about that. Nice job handling that situation. That's the best presentation I've ever seen, this year. And then when you do argumentative types of messages, again, trying to argue with people and, counter them saying, that's a stupid idea, I disagree, and let me explain why I think this is wrong. And then I feel like most of us know what complaining is. You always throw your socks on the floor. You're a slob. You are constantly doing this or that. And then as we, continue along with this, some other disconfirming communication that also dismisses the value of a person can be complete disregard. So, disconfirming messages can be subtle or, more straight to the point, direct, but when you do kind of disregard, that means that you treat the person's messages as completely unimportant or non-existent. So you just kind of are like showing that it's just not something that you really care about. You're just really not, interested in it. Another thing that sometimes people may do is they may do phubbing, and this is the act of snubbing towards people. And you might do this intentionally or you may not do it intentionally. And this is an example of this that I feel like people do pretty frequently now, is where they are on their cell phone or on some sort of social media or some other type of device. So maybe somebody's trying to have an important conversation with you and you just completely are not paying attention and are looking at your phone, and you're just, not showing that you're interested in what they have to say. So that obviously could cause, a problem because the person is gonna, feel like it's just not, they're not having a conversation and you're just not interested. Or you can also not recognize nonverbal cues. Like, let's say somebody looks at you and smiles or gives eye contact and you look away or you don't smile back or you don't acknowledge that other person. That could be another way that you just disregard somebody nonverbally. Another thing that people do, maybe this is more straight out, it could be aggressiveness. This is where you come out and attack another person, and you generally attack a person's character, their background, or their identity. Unlike argumentativeness, aggressiveness is usually when you demean somebody and you demean the worth of others based on some of these things that we're talking about. So you're just attacking them as a person. And so obviously that's going to make anybody upset. Communication research has linked aggressiveness to a lot of other negative outcomes. Obviously, this could result in lowered self-esteem, and people can also then have burnout depression, violence, and even mortality, unfortunately. Another form of aggressiveness is bullying, which I think a lot of us know about this. This has received a lot of attention in the media and from communication scholars. The word bully or that in general, a lot of us have images of a tough kid on the school playground, but bullying can also happen in a lot of different contexts. For instance, this could even happen within your family for, where siblings bully each other, and that can unfortunately have long lasting effects. Or this could happen in the workplace where a boss is bullying their employees, or another employee is bullying somebody else or putting somebody down constantly. And that is a hostile and toxic environment, or between professors and students, between any dynamic of power like that. And that's going to have pretty terrible effects too. Or again, cyberbullying is another big thing that happens. Another thing that sometimes can happen is where people ostracize somebody. This is where you completely exclude somebody and you purposely exclude them from interaction, and you don't even acknowledge that person from a group or acknowledge their communication. And so this can take place in one-on-one interaction. This could take place where, you just give somebody the silent treatment, where you kind of like stonewall and completely shut down, or you can ostracize them from like a group in a group environment. Maybe it's at work. You know, this has even been referred to in a social setting as the social death penalty, because again, you're just purposely excluding them from interaction. And this could have a really hurtful childhood experience if this is something that happens to you when you're growing up and going to school, because it's going to have long-term lasting effects if you are purposely excluded from hanging out with other people, or you feel like there's something wrong with you because nobody wants to talk to you or hang out with you. And the same thing as you go and become an adult, this could happen in the workplace as well, where you get basically excluded from everybody else, and where employees don't include you, or maybe where a boss is giving you only like negative attention. And the most of the studies have showed that being excluded is even more painful and damaging than harassment. So this like form of social isolation and exclusion is it's crazy to think is that is even more damaging to most people than being constantly harassed. And then, so causes and effects of defensiveness. We've talked about defensiveness in some other chapters prior to this and how people respond related to this. So defensiveness is the process of protecting our presenting self and trying to save face. So, people can respond like this for a variety of reasons. Sometimes it's usually because you feel attacked in some way. So you usually respond like this because you feel like somebody's coming at you, or doing something that you feel that you need to try to preserve some sort of image. So it's usually messages we perceive as challenging the image that we want to protect. And this is kind of the process of protecting ourselves. And so although responding defensively to a threatening act, it may seem logical. If you do this repetitively over time, it can cause issues in a relationship. as we kind of talked about in some of the other chapters, if you're overly defensive or defensive when it's not necessary, then it can definitely cause issues because you can respond defensive and misinterpret things as somebody attacking you when they really aren't. So maybe you might think somebody's critiquing you when they, weren't trying to do that, or, something along that lines. So how do we create supportive climates in these different situations? So, even the most positive messages aren't guaranteed to create a supportive and positive communication climate. Sometimes when somebody praises you, you can interpret that as sarcasm. Sometimes if somebody smiles at you, you can think that they are not smiling, that they were trying to be rude. Sometimes if somebody tries to offer you help, you can think that they are being, condescending. Because communication is so complex and we perceive things in so many different ways, there isn't one size fits all, like do this and you're gonna always have the same outcome to create a positive climate. So there are things that you can try to make it more likely to create a positive environment. So several decades ago, Jack Gibb, isolated 6 types of defense arousing communication and 6 contrasting behaviors that seemed to help reduce defensiveness. So these Gibb categories are what he came up with, and this is what's shown on the slide. So reducing defensiveness can occur by sending supportive rather than defense-provoking messages. So these are the areas that he came up with. So first he said create evaluation versus description. So you need to evaluate messages. An evaluative message judges the other person, usually in a negative way, while description is a way to offer your thoughts, feelings, and wants without judging the listener. And then controlling communication versus problem orientation. So controlling communication occurs when a sender seems to be imposing a solution on the receiver with little regard for the receiver's needs or interests, while in problem orientation, communicators focus on finding a solution that satisfies both their own needs and those of others involved. And then strategy versus spontaneity. Strategy can be used to characterize defense arousing messages in which speakers hide their ulterior motives, while spontaneity involves being honest with others rather than trying to manipulate them. And then you have neutrality versus empathy. Neutrality describes a behavior that arouses defensiveness due to its apparent indifference or lack of caring. But if you are empathetic or practice empathy, it shows that you are supporting someone by acknowledging that you care for someone and are looking out for their feelings. And then you have superiority versus equality. If you're being superior, you are probably going to convey some patronizing messages, and you're going to do this explicitly or implicitly. You're basically showing, oh, I'm better than you. Whereas you want to try to achieve equality by communicating that although they may have a greater talent in some areas, you see others as having just as much worth. And so that's going to be, more equality. Then you have certainty versus provisionalism. So individuals that insist that they are right project defense arousing behavior because of the certainty, while if you practice provisionalism, they express openness to other people's ideas and opinions. So basically, you're being more open-minded instead of just saying that, this is right and I'm right and this is the only way to do something. You want to try to be more open-minded to other people's ideas and opinions. And so in the book, they have some different examples. Let me go back of these. So we'll start with, I'm going to give some examples. If you start with evaluation, an evaluation phrase would be, you're not making any sense. And then if I used description instead, I would say, I'm not clear on the point you're making. So those are a difference in how you could say those phrases with each way. Another example is, you're inconsiderate. If you said it using description, I would appreciate it if you'd let me know when you're running late. I was worried. And then here's an example for control versus problem orientation. If you were using controlling, you would say, get off your phone now. I need to talk to you. If you use problem orientation, you would say, I really need to talk to you soon. Can you take a break? Or controlling, there's only one way to handle this problem. Versus problem orientation, looks like we have a problem. Let's work out a solution we can both live with. And then the same thing for strategy versus spontaneity. What are you doing Friday after work? Versus the opposite. I have a piano I need to move Friday after work. Could you give me a hand? Or another example, have you ever considered another line of work? Versus, I'm concerned about your job performance over the last year. Let's set up a time to talk about it. And then the same thing for neutrality versus empathy. Neutrality is, this is what happens when you don't plan properly. Empathy, I'm so sorry that didn't turn out the way you expected. Neutrality, sometimes things just don't work out. That's the way it goes. Versus empathy, I know you put a lot of time and effort into this project. And then superiority versus equality. Would be, when you get to be in my position someday, then you'll be able to understand. Versus equality, I like to hear how the issue looks to you, then I can tell you how it looks to me. Or another example, no, not that way. Let me show you how to do it the right way. Versus, what if we tried it this way? And then certainty versus provisionalism, that will never work. Versus, my guess is that you'll run into problems if you use that approach. So those are examples of how you would use them in different situations. And then talking about conversation from monologue to dialogue. So casual conversation, do you believe we need to reclaim this art of casual conversation? Or how do you think that we do as far as casual conversations? I think that, if we're going to talk with people, and how we talk with people definitely makes a difference. And I think we need to be, aware of how we word things, how we're talking. It's definitely going to make a difference in how people respond. I'm sure that you have experiences with this, and, based on how people respond to the things that you say. So they say in how you should do this appropriately is you should begin with introductions. That's the first step, and then start with from there is kind of ask and listen. And when you are asking and listening, try to use open-ended questions that are conversational questions, which we've talked about this in previous chapters too. Try to not just, have questions that are yes or no, that the open-ended questions that allow people to elaborate and, expand upon different answers are going to be better. And then allow people to reciprocate. Good conversationalists are able to take cues about topics that interest the other person, and then they're able to ask reciprocal questions back and forth. And so, that is just a concept that if you can go back and forth and follow up with somebody, and then, keep it focused, keep it short, keep it interesting, keep it appropriate, and then stay aware and adapt as you're going through the conversation. And then use self-monitoring. So pay attention to what you're saying, but also how somebody else is reacting. It doesn't mean you have to be over self-critical, but just adapt based on how, somebody else is responding to what you're saying, and their verbal and their non-verbal reactions is going to make a difference too. So that you can, respond appropriately within the conversation. And this is kind of what I mentioned. Do you think that we need to reclaim this art of of casual conversation? Or do you think that this is something that people are still able to do well? Or with technology, do you think that this is something, whoops, do you think this is something that has been lost? This is an interesting quote that they say, what we do too much of is we talk about each other, we talk at each other, or we talk past each other. I have found that talking with each other is much more effective. And I can definitely relate to this if you pay attention to conversation, if you observe how people talk and how people are talking nowadays. I think that this makes sense. And it says, a civil conversation can turn into an angry shouting match or a refusal to talk because the amygdala prepares the body for danger, which triggers the production of stress hormones, which is adrenaline and cortisol, and readies the body for fight or flight. So what are guidelines for civil conversation? You have to be aware of a dysfunctional response and consciously replace it with more productive ways of communicating. So, pause and take a deep breath. Remind yourself to remain civil and responsible in your demeanor and language, which can help you fight this fight or flight reflex or response. the goal isn't to solve a problem, rather to discuss differing opinions and beliefs in a way that leaves conversationalists with a greater mutual understanding. You need to establish respectful climate, which is going to make it easier for problem solving. You need to come with a goal of learning, ask for clarification, find common ground, acknowledge and empathize, keep a civil tone, talk about your communication, take responsibility, allow both parties equal time, consider a timeout, and choose a time and place. I mean, you're not going to always agree with everybody, and that's okay. It's okay that we don't always agree with people, and that is going to happen. It's fine. You can say, I have a different opinion than you, but I understand why that's important to you. I have some thoughts in the matter, but I would like to hear yours. I want to hear your input. Like, you can have civil conversations with people, especially if you're talking about things like politics, values, beliefs. I mean, there's often going to be times where people, have differing opinions than you, but it's okay if you are just interested in learning about their perspective and learning about their beliefs, and just trying to do it in a civil way. There are ways that you can do that without attacking each other or attacking somebody's character. I think sometimes people think that you can't talk about things that people disagree on without getting upset or yelling or screaming or whatever, which, that it doesn't have to be that way. And so that is basically most of what was covered in, this chapter. And let's review. We explained the nature of communication climates. We described how communication climates can develop. We distinguished the factors that create defensive versus supportive communication climates. And then we demonstrated ways to engage in casual conversations and civil dialogues. And that is all.